An Introduction to the Book of Acts. The Gospel writer Luke wrote Acts of Apostles. Chapters 1 to 12 of Acts primarily cover the activity of the Apostle Peter. Chapters 13 to 28 feature the activity of the Apostle Paul. Because Luke accompanied Paul on some of his travels, Luke was an eyewitness to certain events he recorded. The book of Acts contains a detailed history of the beginnings of the Christian congregation and its rapid growth. The account commences about where Luke's gospel account ends. Acts covers a period of approximately 28 years, from Jesus' ascension to heaven in 33 CE to about 61 CE, while Paul is still under house arrest in Rome, awaiting the outcome of his appeal to Caesar. The Gospel of Luke and Acts of Apostles were written just a few years apart and were both addressed to the same individual, Theophilus. Did you know? When Luke wrote his Gospel account, he addressed Theophilus with the title Most Excellent, possibly indicating that Theophilus had been a prominent official. However, Luke does not use that title in Acts, which could suggest that he was writing to Theophilus as a mature Christian. Acts of Apostles contains 28 chapters. In chapter 1, Jesus tells his disciples that they will be witnesses of him to the most distant part of the earth. He then ascends to heaven. Chapter 2 records that 10 days later, on Pentecost 33 CE, Holy Spirit is poured out on about 120 disciples. Later that day, about 3,000 people are baptized. Chapters 3 to 9 relate early examples of how the disciples zealously preach and perform miraculous signs. Although they face strong opposition, they boldly continue to spread the Christian message. Stephen, an early Christian, is even murdered because of his faith. A man named Saul witnesses and approves of the execution of Stephen. However, not long after that, Jesus appears to Saul on the road to Damascus. Subsequently, Saul becomes a Christian and is later known as the Apostle Paul. Chapters 10 and 11 describe a period of peace enjoyed by the disciples. Jehovah uses the Apostle Peter to expand the preaching work to include Gentiles, or non-Jews. During this time of expansion, the term Christians is coined to identify Christ's disciples. In chapter 12, persecution breaks out again. Herod puts the Apostle James to death and imprisons Peter, who is later released by an angel. Chapters 13 to 21 describe Paul's 3 eventful missionary tours from about 47 to 56 CE. Paul travels to Cyprus and parts of Asia Minor during his first missionary tour. His second missionary tour takes him back to Asia Minor as well as to Macedonia and Greece. Paul's third missionary tour covers some 4 years and ends in Jerusalem. Paul writes 6 inspired letters during the period that includes his second and third tours. According to one estimate, the book of Acts records Paul traveling nearly 10,000 miles. In chapter 21, Paul is wrongfully arrested in Jerusalem. Chapters 22 to 26 relate Paul's defense. He appears before Felix, governor of Judea, his successor Festus, and King Herod Agrippa II. In the course of his defense, Paul appeals to Caesar, the highest Roman authority of the time. Chapters 27 and 28 describe Paul's arduous journey to Rome, which includes a shipwreck. Acts concludes with Paul under house arrest, awaiting trial in Rome. Despite confinement, he remains busy preaching to all those who come to him. As you read Acts of Apostles, note how the disciples were empowered by Holy Spirit, how they witnessed fearlessly despite fierce persecution, and how they used legal means to defend their right to preach the good news of God's kingdom.